for having me tonight. I'm going to talk tonight about Diaspora Kibbutzim for the Wandering Jew. This has been a long passion of mine ever since I lived in co-housing in 2004 in Denmark. So I'll start out with talking about how my parents lived in a kibbutz, how I lived in co-housing, and what the potential is to bring co-housing to Los Angeles to expand its presence here. It already exists. And maybe in current terms, I'd like the idea of co-housing to occupy your mind and to give you an idea of what the options are for those of you who might think that housing options are very limited now. And I'll start with a slide about the generation boomerang. And I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand if you're part of the generation boomerang, especially if you're sitting next to somebody you're trying to schmooze with tonight. But I graduated grad school in 2009, and it took me a year to find a job. And so my housing options were very limited. Fortunately, I had the support of my parents in Valencia. And I put about 20,000 miles on my car in a year coming out to LA to meet you fabulous people and to come to BINA. And so we see this cartoon in The New Yorker that came out in May 2010. Timothy looks a little sad when he's looking at his amazing PhD diploma on the wall. His parents look a little haggard. So we all know how important it is to find housing options that promote our independence and our own individual definition of happiness. So there are two definitions of community that I want to share with you. Two very scholarly definitions. The first from Wikipedia, that community is a collection, a social collection of people that extend beyond just one household. They share similar social values and typically are within a certain geographic proximity. We know, of course, that community can be built not just physically now, but also virtually on the internet. And the second scholarly source is from the Sanhedrin, which says that a Talmid Hacham, a Torah scholar, cannot live in a city that doesn't have 10 attributes, some of which are a Beit Din, a synagogue, a tzedakah fund, a fund that is collected by 2 people and distributed by 3, a bathhouse, a bathroom, a doctor, a butcher. All of these things testify to the needs that we have in a community that satisfy our physical and our spiritual requirements. And so in 1979, my parents decided to move to Israel and live on a kibbutz, and they were in search of their own particular type of community. My father studied agriculture at the University of Illinois, and they were very much Zionists, so they wanted to see what this excitement was all about. This is my father and my sister in front of the Dome of the Rock. And this is the kibbutz they lived on, kibbutz Yosemite, which is a dairy powerhouse now, but he really enjoyed picking carrots. My mom worked in the nursery, and this was an oasis in the desert, and it's a huge operation now. They supply the majority, I believe it's 85% of the milk in Israel today. And if you're on the boardwalk in Tel Aviv, you can stop by the ice cream shop, Yotvata Be'ir, and they got an extended family from it that 30 years later, we still get to visit. They visit us, and I know I always have a place to go to in Tel Aviv. This is a Pesach dinner, Seder at the kibbutz, and at the bottom, this is my sister and my mom in the back. Co-housing, collective housing, is a very Jewish ideal, but it's also a very human ideal. And you know the saying, there's nothing new under the sun. And the Polish shtetl, and this one in particular is the one at Auschwitz, which was very vibrant in the 1800s. And it's a fabulous example of what Jews strive for. Even today, how do we express our collectivism? Through providing meals when a woman has her baby and when a relative has passed. And so in 2004, I spent my junior year abroad in Birkerud, Denmark, at this co-housing, Bofelskeb, Anadommen. And Anadommen means duck pond in Danish. And I guess it was kismet that I was placed here. You have to fill out an application when you want to be set up with a host family, and I didn't put any requirements down. I said, I'm totally open. And so they put me on a train 20 miles outside of Copenhagen with 18 wonderful families. And the way that this co-housing was set up was the 18 families bought in to, they owned their individual units. This was one unit, this was one unit, and then I was at the end. And every Sunday night, the group had to get together to make decisions. So there was the Beit Din structure, both Elskebet and Adamin. So they had to have the justice part. They had to have the tzedakah part. Each unit was a different size. So that accommodated multi-generational families. Young couples who couldn't afford a bigger unit could still afford to live here. These three pictures really sum up very well what the experience of living in co-housing in Denmark was like. When you live in a smaller unit, you can put on your personal touches, like this shelf for the woman's cat. 2 times a year, there were mandatory work days. And so this was unfortunately the day after my 21st birthday. I was a little under the weather, but I did catch this picture. And it's a very important lesson that I learned from the picture on the upper right, which is this was my neighbor within the co-housing building an African-style fence with the neighbor outside of the co-housing. And so the lesson I drew from that was never build a fence that you don't have the person on the other side willing to build it with you. And Kirsten at the bottom was in her 80s and my closest friend at co-housing. So let's move to the US now. Since '87, about 250 collective housing units, compounds have been built or are planned in the US. 50% of those have been planned in the last 5 years alone. One example of the Jewish collective is Kayam Farm at Pearlstone in Maryland. And what you can do is go there for a few months or a few weeks out throughout the year and do workshops to learn how to farm in a sustainable way. Another example is the social collective, and that's the Moishe House, of which there are 40 in 13 countries. And this has completely exploded in recent years. What happens at Moishe House is young Jewish adults, typically in their early 20s, get subsidized housing in exchange for putting on 7 to 8 programs a month. This can be karaoke, it can be a Shabbat dinner. Doesn't matter if it's religious or secular. The idea is to provide opportunities for young Jewish adults who don't necessarily have that sense of collective in LA and around. And in talking with my friend who lives at the Moishe House in LA, there's one in San Fernando Valley, and they're opening up a third one somewhere in LA soon. It provided her the opportunity to move out of her parents' home. She wouldn't have been able to afford to do so otherwise. And it has helped her maintain her Jewish connection since she graduated college. And another aspect, which is both positive and negative, is it takes a lot of time. You still have to have a part-time job on the side. But it's a wonderful example of expanding people's options in this era. And so now, I want to make the case for co-housing in LA. So Moishe House is in West Hollywood. And the LA Eco Village is secular, and that's in Koreatown. And in East Hollywood, Los Feliz, actually it's Hollywood, yeah, missed the Los Feliz border. I would love to propose Hollywood co-housing. So that might be a little bit difficult for those of you on the west side to digest, but I think the east side is great. It's within a half mile of Griffith Park. It's a block from the Metro Red Line, grocery stores, big boxes. And so this particular lot, I walk by all the time. It's half an acre, and when I think about co-housing and collective housing and the options that I want to have, I think about the identity that it would have. It would have vibrant public events. It would have unique natural and man-made landmarks. Griffith Park Observatory is my favorite. And it would have diverse cultural, ethnic, and religious backgrounds of its neighborhood inhabitants. We see the elevation here from Google Maps. On the right is a market, and on the left is a flower market and dry cleaner. And if I thought about going down Western Avenue at about 40 miles an hour, what would I use with this piece of empty land? I would want something that welcomes you in, where you could see activity from the street. I would want something that's a safe haven for two people to have a nice private conversation. And I would want something that doesn't just think about density in terms of dwelling units per acre, but as Teddy Cruz, an architect in San Diego, considers density, it's the number of economic and social exchanges. That's real density. How dynamic is the environment that we're building for ourselves? So I wanted to share this last quote, which is from Rabbi Jill Jacobs, and she gave the second quote about the Talmid Haham, and she says, though the precise structure of Jewish communities has always changed according to place, time, and current interest, membership in a Jewish community has always demanded a sense of shared destiny, manifested in the obligation to care for members of the community. The place that we live is an expression of our social, economic, and political identity. So having more options never hurts. Thank you.